Presenting offerings in the ancient Egyptian temples was the most common religious practice and the one that represents a single united concept. Each offering served a specific purpose, the most important of which is the power of influence that offering had through the ritual concerned with it, which gives its receiver power and activity. The idea of offerings was built on two concepts. One of them is connected with the Eye of Horus, and it's the offering and the greatest gift of all for everyone, and represents the return of life and its rejuvenation and its strength. The other imagination is built on the Ma'at, which points that the offerings are one of the means of holding on to the system. Petrie sees that the offerings rituals started since the pre-dynastic period, and that they are a group of superficial positions performed by the king or the priest who represent him in the temple. The general purpose of the offerings rituals in the temples is to serve the deity in a complete way that guarantee that he has all the necessary offerings in the future in return. It's noticed that the recorded scenes in the temples do not picture the king giving life to the deity, but it's the opposite way, for the deity is the one who gives the king life, while the king performs daily rituals in his favor in return. Czerny dates the daily service rituals that are performed in the temples to the Sun Creed from the 5th dynasty. That was when the king was the one who serves God Ra in the temple of the sun. Therefore, the religious rituals in the temple followed that path later, and the king became responsible for performing these rituals in front of the gods. The king in ancient Egypt was usually pictured presenting an offering with his hands to the god within the rituals of the daily services in the temple. By that, the equation of giving and taking was achieved, for the king gets closer to the god by performing rituals of offerings. In return, the god offers him life and ruling, and a lot of good things, and his welfare. Since the king is a medium between the people and the gods, he has to perform these rituals, or he is delegate of the priests of the temple. In return, all the gifts of the deity reach the people. It's noticed that the position of the king in the several offering scenes represented on the walls of the temples have got an alteration in the position of the hands in case of offerings, for we find him presenting the offering with one hand or both hands. In the case of presenting with one hand, the other hand is pictured right behind the hand which carries the offering, as if it blesses that offering. Sometimes the position of that blessing hand could be above or in front of the offering. Usually, the king carries the offering above his hands directly or on a flat board. Concerning the positions of the gods receiving the offering, the deity could be presented standing with one step forward, or standing in a mummy position like God Ptah or Osiris, or seated on a chair, or standing with another deity, standing behind him, or sitting down. Usually, the deities in the offering scenes are pictured with signs and special scepters like the Was, the Ankh, the Nekhekh, the Heka, the Waj, and the Sistrums, each with a crown or his special hair cover. The common people in ancient Egypt approached the deities by burning incense and presenting offerings in the temples in the different festivals and religious occasions, or seeking the ability of a special god to push away a harm or respond to a wishing will, like curing patients or giving babies to the barren woman. These offerings were done in the courts of the temples or in the outer chambers, but not inside the rooms of the temple, for the commoners were not allowed in general to enter into the inner chambers of the temple. The funerary offerings played a significant role in the tombs, for they serve an important symbolic benefits for the deceased by reciting spells and offering formula upon them, and also burning incense so that their scents are transported to the spirit of the dead who feeds on them. These offerings are presented by the son of the deceased and his family in the festivals and the different occasions, in addition to the periodic offerings, and by that, the deceased guarantee the continuity in the afterlife by having the offerings needed for that available. The ancient Egyptian was very keen on picturing and recording these offerings with their different types on the walls of the tombs to guarantee his possession of them and the other life, in fear of belating the presentation of these offerings to his tomb or their neglect, in a way that would prevent his use of the offerings and achieving the other hopeful life. So, he was keen on carving all types of offerings and the funerary formulae, which could transfer them into real offerings of which he can benefit. In ancient Egypt, no special offering was connected purely with a certain deity in the different scenes of offerings, for the same offering was presented to more than one king in different scenes, which coincide with the gods to whom the temple is dedicated, or which is connected with the king or a certain event the scenes represented in an indirect way. The same deity could be presented with more than a gift that differs from one relief to another and from one temple to another. But it had been noticed the connection between some offerings with one species without the other, and that could relate to the connection of the offering to the natural sexuality of the deity or to fertility. That's like presenting the offering of the lettuce plant and the scepter Herib for only the male gods, while the offering of Shebet was usually given to the female goddesses and not the male ones. Researchers had different opinions concerning the consequence of the offering scenes in the temples, for some of them tried to put an order to these offerings and rituals, and some others tried to connect the types of the offerings with special places in the temple, while others tended to the idea of the non-existence of a certain arrangement or a certain connection between one offering and a part of the temple. There are different types of offerings presented to the gods, including the water offering and the incense offering, and the natron salt offerings, and the decoration offerings, and the cloth or material offerings, and also the ointments offerings, as well as the oil offering and the colors offering. The offering of pouring the water is one of the most important rituals offerings that happened in the Egyptian temples. For it's by the water offering the body of the deceased is revived again, and that's by regaining the vital liquids which went dry on him. Also, pouring the water helps to accelerate the rebirth of the deceased again. Water also facilitates the birth of the baby and is still used till today. Pouring water revives the gods. That's why water was used extensively in the offering rituals and purification in the temples. It's noticeable that the purification offerings were pictured a lot in the daily used temples and in the funerary temples, but they were rarely depicted in the tombs. This is due to the link of purity with the temple. In the same time, the tombs were not a place for purification. Amongst the rituals are pouring the water using a jar called nemset, and also by using kettles called iyab, and also by using the jars of deshret and the jars of nu and the jars of heset. Performing these rituals might require the use of one jar or two or three or four of the same kind. Burning incense could accompany these rituals as well as other rituals. Water was always regarded by the ancient Egyptians as a basic means of purification and had to be used in the act of purification by the priests who serve in the temples. Thus, there must be a sacred lake in any major temple. That's where all priests get cleaned before they perform any ritual inside the temple or do any service, so that each priest could be as pure as possible, thanks to the constant flowing water of the Nile. The act of purification by burning incense is considered one of the most important scenes of purification. The king or the priest had to be purified by incense before performing any of the rituals or the acts of offerings, and before entering the house of the mourning. It's mentioned that the nice scent of the incense is the smell of the deities. The ritual of incense was common in all rituals and religious acts performed inside the temple. That ritual was performed in the temples of the gods and in the funerary temples, as well as performing it in the tombs. The purification offering was done in the festivals and in the religious celebrations like the Obit festival and Soccer festival. There are many various figures and types used in this ritual, including the tool that has a bell shape and the arm incense. The act of burning incense was done by one of the jars of incense or an incense burner. Among the examples of that ritual is a purification using a bell incense burner and using a jar of incense called antiu, and the ritual of burning using iyab jars. In the performance of purification ritual, more than one incense burner could be used, or two, or three, or four, together with a jar. Another ritual could accompany that, which is pouring the water ritual. Both the water and the incense are considered means of purification, and till today in Egypt, people purify their homes and shops and mosques and churches by burning incense. Natron salt is chemically sodium carbonate substance and is one of the main materials used to perform the act of purification. The natron used in the ritual was brought by the ancient Egyptians from the Nile Valley in Lower Egypt, and from El Kab in Upper Egypt, and from Shetbet in Lower Egypt, according to texts. The ritual could be performed by presenting a jar or a pot filled with natron. The jar could be 2 or 4, and could include presenting 4 or 5 bowls of natron salt. Usually, this ritual was performed 2 times a day. In one of them, the natron brought from El Kab was presented, and in the second ritual, the natron brought from Shetbet of Lower Egypt was presented. Presenting natron was one of the general important purification rituals that was believed to help the deceased to resurrect and be reborn again. The natron offering represents one of the rituals that were performed daily in the temples when the king appears holding a jar with 5 bowls of natron placed in order. Each one of the bowls has its own virtue, which is explained in the texts of Edfu Temple. The first bowl gives you authority. The second bowl is placed over the bowl of incense. The third pushes away filthiness. The fourth confronts and prevents plagues. And the fifth conquers the hostile powers. The offering texts in Dendera Temple says, "Take the 5 bowls of the natron bowls of the north of Natron Valley, for they will purify your body from evil, and your mouth will be as pure as a newborn calf the day his mother gives birth to him." There are a group of offerings offered after the purification process and included within the rituals of the daily service performed for the statue of the deity in the temple. These offerings include the cloth, the oils, the ointments, the kahl, and the collars. The cloth or wearing materials were considered one of the most important offerings by the king to the deity after the purifications rituals. The shapes and styles of that offering differed according to the thickness and nature of the fabrics from which clothes were made. These clothes were made of the Egyptian linen cloth, which is known for its high quality and softness. The king presented 5 colored dresses to the god. The rituals of this offering happened in the house of the mourning, included in the scenes of decorating the king and the daily service ritual of the god, and in the scenes of opening the mouth ritual. Usually, the offering was presented in the form of 3 columns, or 4, or 5 pieces, or an offering of 2 rolls, or an offering of clothes over a tray. On the first day of the new year, festivals were held in all temples to celebrate the feast of Ra and the textiles feast, which is the textile from which the clothes of the gods were made, and touch their bodies and hide their images, for they wear the clothes that give the gods a materialistic tangible presence, although they remain unseen to the common people. The textile was offered together with the ointment. The one used in rituals came in 4 colors: the white fabric that illuminates the face of the deities, the green which revives their color, the violet which reflects its color on their bodies, and the red which suits the gods.